The death of a loved one in a child's life impacts a child greatly. Whether the loved one is a family member or a friend, a child grieves. This video offers helpful information to adults on how to help children when they are grieving the death of a loved one. Khris Ford and Paula Darcy work with adults and children to help them through their grief after the death of a loved one. Their personal experiences with death give Khris and Paula intimate knowledge and compassion for those experiencing the death of a loved one.
My passion for working with grieving children really came from my own experience as a child first, who had two siblings who died, and then later in life, after the death of our son, knowing what it was that our daughter, who was 11 at the time, was struggling with, and there were no resources for her. I became determined that there would be resources for families with children, so that not only did the adults get that kind of attention that they needed after a loss, but the children really got what they needed as well.
I had a brother who was very ill in his infancy and then died at the age of 15. And then when I created my own family, my young husband and almost 2-year-old daughter were killed in a drunk driving accident, and I was 3 months pregnant at the time, so I had a daughter who was born into an atmosphere of grief and loss. It's so important for children to have an adequate opportunity to grieve, because they grow up to be adults. And this is the work of my life, seeing people all over the world who have pain that has never been healed. I think of it many times as like holding a beach ball underwater, and you exert tremendous pressure because the ball is buoyant and it wants to rise to the surface. And pain over all the years kept underneath the water like that takes your energy, takes, in a very subtle way, a lot of your focus, and it becomes a real grabber of your joy and your happiness.
See if you can think of a happy, funny, just a great memory that you have. When we touch children, we really are changing the way people think about and approach this whole process, so that it can be one that's natural, one that leads toward growth, rather than paralysis, one that really says to us that grief has the opportunity, has the potential to change us and to allow us to be more rather than less on the other side. Would you just kind of tell us your name and why you're here and how old you are?
I'm Emily and I'm 5 years old and I'm in kindergarten.
And do you want to tell us why you're here?
Because my mom died. My name is Kylie. I am 8 years old, and I'm here because my baby brother died.
I'm Jeremy, and I'm here because my brother died, and I am 9 years old.
My brother, his name was Sultan. He was 6 years older than me. He was sick with a chronic illness for 14 years. He just got so sick to the point where he couldn't breathe on his own anymore or digest food.
It is important for adults to recognize that adults and children grieve differently.
I think the primary difference between children's grief and adult grief is first that children grieve in little windows of time. It's so important that we allow them to move in and out of it, because their capacity to manage these big emotions is just very limited. Unlike adults who might stay very focused on this over a whole weekend during a retreat or a workshop, children just couldn't or wouldn't do that even if I attempted to try to get them to.
John Schlegel's wife, Christina, died of breast cancer. His daughter Abby was 2 and Emily was 4.
When it became obvious to me that she was definitely going to die, I knew that somebody had to let them kind of get accustomed to what might be getting ready to happen. Abby, my youngest, was too small, and she just didn't get anything that was going on. She turned 2 the day before her mom died. But Emily was 4 at the time, and she did get it. You know, she was understanding that there was a problem. So I took her to Chick-fil-A. That was our place. It's still our place where we have our talks. I said, Emily, you know what? Your mommy is not doing well at all, and she's, you know, God can do a miracle, and He can save her life, but the deal is, it doesn't look like it's going to happen.
3 weeks after John's conversation with Emily, Christina died.
I took her to Chick-fil-A. I thought, I'm not going to be able to tell her. I'm not going to be able to tell her mom died. But then everyone else in the family was so upset, and I knew it had to be me that told her. And I needed to tell her. So she just was numb. She looked at me for a few minutes, and then she said, can we get some chicken nuggets?
Emily is now part of a support group for grieving children where she feels safe to say how she feels.
You remember how you felt when Daddy told you that?
Really sad.
It's very important for them to establish a safe place to retreat to, both inside themselves as well as being able to say, I can't talk about this anymore.
Randy and Cecilia's son Colin was diagnosed with diabetes in the 8th grade. When Colin was 18, a series of cascading events led to his death.
The first thing, it's just the insanity of the moment. And of course, you're so wrapped up in the moment. You know, there's the kids are in the room. They're going, "Why did I get sent out of the room? Why is mom and dad screaming?" Unlike mom and dad, they hardened up, I guess would be a good word. The emotions got a little.
I think to protect themselves, they retreated. Children, they don't have the emotional capacity to take all of that in. And so they have a tendency to be somewhat neutral. Ian decided that he wanted to make a sword for Colin. And so he embarked on this project, this huge project of taking a machete and turning it into a sword. Ian was having to take all of this angst and this feeling of unrest, and he focused it on this project.
Children often will put their grief on a back burner in a family context until the adults in the household have begun to kind of come back to some place of balance. And obviously that's because children need the adults in their world to be there for them, and they need to know that it is safe. I typically will get a phone call and a mother will say, you know, my husband died 3 years ago, and up until the last 6 months, my kids have just done beautifully. My next question always is, what happened to you about 6 months ago? And typically the response is, I'm just getting my head above water again.
One difference that I see between the way children grieve and adults grieve that I think is a real positive and can be a model actually for adults is that children, especially younger children, as they go in and out, are able to go to happy moments even though there's a great sadness in themselves and in the house. And it looks sometimes to adults like, wow, that was not a very deep loss to them, or they're over it so quickly. But again, it's just this in and out that children do, and it's great to support that when you see that in kids. You know, you had a wonderful time at the birthday party today, and I'm so glad, because I think we grow up as adults really believing that there is one emotion that expresses sort of a tie or a love to the person who has died, and we see that as a very painful sadness. And I think kids very naturally realize that you also attach to someone who loved in love.
I try and do things that I know that he enjoyed. While he was in the hospital for the last few weeks, he was alive. He watched this movie, Men in Black, over and over and over again. And I watch that movie sometimes. It makes me feel better.
The family system has enormous impact on the way a child grieves.
In my own experience, I know as a young mother, just having given birth but had so much loss, it was enormously difficult to be as present as I wanted to be for my child as she was growing up. There were constant memories that would surface from when her sibling was that particular age. I use the airline theology as my gold standard. They say if we have a sudden drop in cabin pressure, a mask will drop from the cabinet above your head. Put your own mask on first. There's nothing more vital that any parent or caretaker can do than to do their own grief work. That is the best insurance you have that the child is learning a way to grieve.
It's pretty hard when moms are sad, isn't it?
Mom and dads don't really show because they don't want you to worry until they can't really help it.
One of the things that I think I see over and over is fear of crying in front of our children or showing any kind of emotion. And what I always say to parents, and what I tried to live out myself, was that it is important for them to see you cry, if that is an authentic emotion and way of expressing it for you. Because I've had children say to me, "Mommy never cries, and I thought she really loved Daddy. I wonder why that is." I think it can be rather confusing for children when we don't express authentic emotions in front of them. Do you think when Daddy's upset, is it okay to see him be upset, or would you rather not?
Sometimes yes and sometimes no.
So do you think they should cry in front of you and let you know, or not?
I think half the time, yeah, but half the time, no.
Name what's going on. Say, "I'm really missing Daddy right now," or "I'm really missing Brother right now." And this is what I do to help myself when I feel this way, so that the parent begins to model that I have to do some things to help myself. And then they can have that wonderful teachable moment of saying to their own child, "What do you do when you feel that way?"
My mom shows different ways, like if she's like sad with my brother, for like what reason. Because then I know, and I ask if I can do something, but sometimes I know that look, so I just don't wanna. But I don't like it when my mom's sad.
I think one of the most difficult things in grieving families is that we're all at different places at different times. It's like a merry-go-round. At once we have the family life cycle that is moving. At the same time, we have these horses that are going up and down, and none of the two at the same time. And that's the way it is in a household.
I think everybody's got something inside of them, and that none of us have said it yet. And I know something's gonna happen when one of us is gonna explode. I think space between us would help a lot. All of us have been hurt so bad at this point. We just need to take time for ourselves.
Grief does not look the same for any two people. So someone's tears are their grief, someone else's activity may be their grief. And if a family system can find within their circle a deep respect for one another, they not only have a tool that will take them a long way through the grieving time and process, but also something that will serve them really for the rest of their life.
You give your children the space to grieve and opportunity. Even though neither one of the children vocalized a desire to recognize Colin's date of death, Brandy and I, of course, needed to. It was important for us. And so, since they didn't have any tradition they wanted to lay the ground for, any ceremony that they wanted to do, we simply gave them an opportunity to be at his graveside. We made sure that there were opportunities when Randy and I weren't at the graveside. Ian actually, through his therapist, had told us that he wanted time alone on the property. We called before we came back to say, you know, is everything okay? Is it time for us to come back? Would that be all right for you? And he said yes, that it was. So even though it may not be in the way that you do it, you know, make sure that you open a space.
The other aspect of the family system work that I think is so important is this a family where we're going to talk about the person who died? Or is this a family where they sort of fell off the face of the earth, literally, in terms of they never existed? And for some people, that is the way in which they manage grief, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the children in the family need that. And so coming to some way of negotiating that so that everybody gets at least a little bit of what they need.
If it's my mom or dad, or like my mom's friend Ramona, who used to take care of Travis, I would like remind me of some of the stuff that he did. He gave like his organs to like 1 to 7-year-old, and he was always a big part of our lives.
I remember a family that we were working with the children, and this family took lots of videos and had a camcorder, and I guess the camcorder went everywhere with them. And these children wanted desperately to look at some of these family videos to see pictures of the brother who had died. However, Mom and Dad were not in a place where they could manage to see those images. And so they had hidden these videos away. We spent about 6 months working on a process of negotiating where, okay, Mom and Dad can't look at them, but we can get them out and either bring them to a group to look at or go in a room where Mom and Dad don't have to see them. So that kind of communication is so important so everybody gets what they need.
For parents, it is important to continue to provide a safe and stable environment for children after the death of a loved one.
See, parenting doesn't stop. You still have to parent. You have to parent in your grief, and you have to parent a child who is grieving. But you still have to parent. You still have to set boundaries and limitations and know what those are. And grief can definitely, blind you.
One of the byproducts of a disaster like this is you rearrange your priorities in life, and what is important sometimes isn't important anymore, and what wasn't really as important becomes important. The children are going to have that same type of apathy, and is this really important? I know I have to do my schoolwork because it's required of me, but is it really important that I do this or that?
I had recently had a friend who her husband died, and she was very concerned about her daughter's grades. And in the big scheme of things, what is this year going to mean? What is happening in this moment? How is that going to reflect on your child's life 5 years from now?
There is support available for adults who are grieving. Finding outside help will enable adults in turn to help their children with their grief.
Don't try to be that guy or that gal that says, I've got it all together, my strength will overcome this. I've got to be the strong one for my family. Well, that's true, but you can't do it all by yourself.
In terms of the process of the family system, I also think it's very important that parents have their own resources for their own grief. There's such a fine line where you want the family to be expressing to one another if they choose, if they can, what they feel. But there's an appropriate line that needs to be drawn, because sometimes to see the full extent of the upset of your parent is just too destabilizing. It's just too difficult for kids. And I think parents that have their own resource where they can go for those deeper feelings then are better able, when they come back to the family system, to just report a bad day, but not the depth of how they're debating the meaning of life.
In the grief counseling, not only are you receiving information on how to make your day, how to get through the day, honestly, but it also allows you to bring things to an individual who is removed from the situation and say, okay, this is happening with my child. And they can look at you and say, calm down, this is perfectly normal, this is typical behavior. Or they, on the flip side, they can say, I think perhaps you need to kind of look into that. And having that reassurance of a neutral party really gives you solace.
We're so fortunate today because there are lots of resources for adults in terms of processing their grief and using those resources. For example, there are support groups in almost every city across the country. And I certainly recommend that if you don't know where those are, that one good resource in almost every community is to find a hospice and call and ask them if they know about the support groups in your area, or call area faith communities. There's online chat groups for people to join. Opportunity, obviously, to go see individual therapists, grief therapists, who have particular expertise in the field of grief and loss. There are also workshops and seminars and retreat weekends. So visiting and looking at websites and information about area retreat centers is another resource for people as they're trying to find a way to process their own grief. I think one of the misnomers about children and teen grief is that sadness is the primary feeling for kids when they've had a loss, and certainly that is one of the feelings, but the primary feeling for children is anxiety.
I worried about what I was gonna do next, because I'd always thought, well, what about when I get older, and what if I have to take care of my brother because he's so sick and my mom can't take care of him forever. I worried about what was going to happen to my mom because she took care of him for so long.
Well, we have something new on the wall over here.
Here?
You see this tree over here?
What's
it called? It's called a worry tree. Well, we have a worry tree up here because lots of kids tell me that after somebody in their family dies, that they worry about different kinds of things. And so I thought one way for us to get those worries outside of ourselves, get it out from inside here, out to here, is to say what we're worried about, and Miss Paula's gonna write it on a colorful piece of paper. You can even tell her what color you want. And then we're gonna hang it up there on the tree. So does anybody have anything you've worried about in the last 2 weeks?
I have a feeling that my sister will she'll get hurt one time.
Kylie, what do you worry about?
That I might also lose another family member, and that I will not know what it feels like when I'm gone from my family.
I worry about that I might lose another family member.
The first question children will often ask once they've grasped even a little bit of what has happened is, who's going to die next? Not is someone going to die, but who?
I think there's a prevailing question, who will take care of me? And that's true whether or not it's been a parent who's died, because even if it's been a sibling who's died, the parents are not the same. The parents you had are no longer responding and feeling as stable to you as the parents that you now have. And in my own case, I was pregnant when my husband was killed. So my daughter was born into a family system that for her was very precarious. All she had was one parent. Her sibling had also been killed. And I can remember often sitting down with her over and over again and saying to her reassuring things like, I take very good care of myself. I watch my nutrition. I get exercise. If I go and you're with a babysitter, I'm very careful about where I park. And for years I did this, and it was just a reassurance that somebody is going to be here for you, that you're being left in good hands. That anxiety can go on literally for years.
Anxiousness in children may also express itself at school.
When children are trying to be still all day long in a desk, and inside their bodies, they just want to come out of their skin. So when I work with teachers, I'm always saying, be aware that these are kids who may come across as looking like this label that we often use on children as if they're ADD or ADHD, when in fact this is about anxiety that is absolutely a normal response. School nurses tell me that They can always tell when there's been something like this happen to a child because their frequency in the clinic triples. In fact, some kids they've never seen before. And now they're at the nurse's office constantly because of the physical stuff that goes on for children and the need to call home because I'm scared that something's happened at home and I'm not there.
The second large emotion that is common in children after the death of a loved one is feeling different.
Most of the people who knew our family, like my really close friends, they knew because just people started telling other people, and my parents told our family friends, I guess, and so they knew. But other than that, I didn't really tell anybody else. I didn't really want to make like a big deal about it.
Ian went through a phase where I think he was the brother of the boy who died. And I think Megan may have even had that.
Right.
So they feel different and they feel anxious, like everyone knows me because my brother died.
Going back to school was a very difficult thing because they knew that all their classmates knew this very intimate thing. It's not often in our lives that something is so cutting is displayed in such a public manner, and death is one of those things.
I was stunned when my daughter was 11 and we moved to a new town to find that she had told all of her new friends that I was divorced. And when I learned this, I questioned her about it, and she said, half of my friends have parents that's divorced. No one else has a father who's died. And I saw then the force of that being different. And one of the most valuable things we can do, if we can find it, is a peer support group for kids that allows them to be the same as some other kids.
I had a little boy and his mother who were coming to group for the first time, 7-year-old, and his father had died. They arrived a little bit late, so when I took him down to his group room, I said to the group leader, "Janie, your new group person is here." And before I could even finish my sentence, the group of children who were sitting on the floor at the other end of the room, one of the little guys says, "Did your daddy die too?" And this little boy looked up at me as if to say, "Oh, what's the right answer here?" And I just let him be, didn't respond. And so he very slowly began to nod his head yes. And just as he began to do that, all of the other little boys who were in this group all went, "Yes!" And of course, the group leader looked at me as if to say, "What did I do wrong here?" And in fact, it was so much of what had been done right, because those children were saying, "You're like us."
The third common feeling among children after the death of a loved one is feeling somehow responsible for the death.
Megan had gone to a gymnastics meet and didn't do as well as she wanted to, and Colin told her he's going to the store, and normally she loves to go to the store. She was wrapped up in that moment of self-anger, I guess is a good word for it, and she didn't ask him if she could go with him. And for months she had told me she asked him, and he said no. And then finally, right before we had the 1-year anniversary, she confided in me that she didn't ask, and that she felt incredibly guilty, again responsible for not asking if she could go to the store with him, that maybe it would have made something different.
Kids need a lot of opportunity if they do feel responsible for the death. If I'd been a better kid, Daddy wouldn't have gotten so sick. They need a lot of opportunity just to say that and to say that and to say that again. I think to reassure back you really weren't responsible probably goes right through kids' ears. I think it's more that they need to say it and to say it and to say it until other things are obvious to them.
A story that I remember very well that just really touched me was a little boy who's in his family. It was ritual tradition that before they went to bed at night that each parent would come and kiss them goodnight, and they would have a little bit of a conversation, and then they would fall to sleep. And this particular little boy had fallen asleep before Daddy got upstairs to kiss him goodnight. And the next morning, Daddy was killed in an automobile accident on the way to work. And the little boy was convinced that it was because Dad was so upset the next morning that he had not been present in his driving and had had an accident. Now, we as adults obviously know that wasn't what caused that accident, but he was convinced of that.
Children may also feel guilty after the death of a loved one.
I felt really guilty that my brother had gotten sick and that I didn't. I felt guilty because sometimes, or most of the time, I felt frustrated with my parents and with him that he was sick. And I felt like that had taken away from me growing up like a normal kid.
We need to be offering all kinds of opportunities for them to put this out here so that we can be responsive and that they can hear themselves over and over and over say, I think it's my fault because.
When talking with children about the death of a loved one, adults need to tell them the truth and to be authentic.
It's always important to tell the truth. It's always important to be honest. You measure your language down to the level that they can understand, but you're never trying to say something in a way that softens, because they will know that. Kids, better than adults, know when we're not telling the truth, and truth is what they need. That's what makes them feel secure.
If adults try to shield children from the truth, children may create a reason for how they were responsible for the death of a loved one.
As much help as we had during the process of Christina dying, there was also a lot of real dysfunction around how the kids were shielded from a lot of the things that it's just sort of a, we don't want to have any pain. I mean, we've already got enough pain. The kids don't need the pain. The kids don't need the exposure. I didn't realize, would have never realized Emily was carrying was a sense of responsibility for Christina's death. And I didn't really, again, she was so numb and so unwilling to talk about the issue when I hit it directly that I never went there. I mean, I went to where she wanted to go and then I stopped. And one of the things we found through Khris working with her, she said, well, she went to heaven right after she breastfed me. The reason why I believe that she brought up that particular example is about 2 or 3 years before Christina was diagnosed. I mean, she was 28, 29 years old. We had a scare with this also. She had a lump or some sort of thing that shouldn't have been there in her breast, and it turns out when they removed it, it was just a cyst, was the good news. But the other thing was she had some sort of disorder that was causing her to not be able to nurse at that time. And we shared that pretty openly, and Emily just stored that away. And when it came time to try to connect the dots, she pulled that out of her memory and said, that's got to be why she got breast cancer.
I mentioned earlier that as a child I had some losses, and one of those involved the loss of a 6-week-old sibling. Actually, at the time of his death, I was not there. I had been sent to my grandmother's because of the fact that my mother had had a very difficult delivery and she just needed some space. However, because his death was such a difficult thing for my parents to manage, when I came back, no one told me where my baby brother was. All I knew is that people in my household were angry and sad. And because I couldn't figure it out, I literally created a memory of how this baby died, and I was responsible. I was responsible in my head for this until I was about 40 years old, when my mother and I were sharing about sort of some timelines in my life, and I asked the question, what about this death? And she said, oh, you remember that? And I said, I remember it. Of course I remember it. I was responsible. And her mouth flew open and she said, you weren't even there.
I think it's pretty universal to think that when we don't tell children the truth and include them in the conversations that speak that truth, what they create will almost always be so much worse than whatever truth we think is too difficult for them to handle.
Children's understanding of death and the way children carry and express their grief varies according to their age.
My mom and I came back from my grandma's. She kept us while my mom was sick, so I wouldn't get the same thing as her.
Children in the preschool age, 3 to 5-ish, first of all, carry their grief primarily physically. They carry it in their bodies. And their understanding of death, per se, is very limited because they don't have an understanding of time. They certainly don't have an understanding of the permanence of death. What little bit of understanding they have is probably going to come from the sensory understanding of death. So when we talk to a 3-year-old about life, the way they would say they know something's living is by the fact that it talks and eats and sings, the things that children think about that are very sensate. And so the opposite is true when we think about death, that someone who is dead cannot do those very same things. However, for a preschooler, that would only be a moments long. And so it'd be like saying to a preschooler, next Saturday we're going to go to Johnny's birthday party, and how many times between now and next Saturday are they going to ask you, is today the day? So they're going to be doing the same thing around death. Is Daddy coming back? The other aspect of young children is that they have such a limited feeling vocabulary. And so one of the things that we want to help them do is to have names for feelings that they have.
I worked with a family that I thought had a very wonderful way of helping kids identify feelings and be okay with them. And they would put a little chart on the refrigerator every morning, and it had lots of different choices on it. Today I'm sad, today I'm mad, today I don't know, I'm confused, I'm angry at the world. And they had tiny little magnets, and it became a routine in that family every morning. People had their own little magnet codes, and they would put them somehow on this list, and it created a really wonderful opportunity for people to discuss any way they wanted, what it was they were feeling, but also for the child to begin to identify, this is the way I'm feeling, and it was implicit in that, and it's okay to feel that way. And I think sometimes with the more aggressive feelings, we have more difficulty with someone's aggressive feelings in grief than we do with their sadness. And with the more aggressive feelings, it becomes really important to teach a way that's safe and that's appropriate to express those feelings.
One of the things we have to be so cautious with children this age, because they are concrete learners, is the language that we use around death and dying. I remember working with a young child who Daddy had gone in for a very routine operation. The surgeon came out and said to the family, looking very sad, said, "I'm so sorry, but we've lost him." And weeks later, that little boy was expressing such frustration and confusion over why people were so upset. Why don't we just go find him? What we can do to help a 3 to 5-year-old child is, first of all, they need to be held and touched, even more than we would normally do that, because it is such a physical experience for them. It also means that we need to be open to telling that story of the loss over and over and over, because that child's not going to hold it over time.
The way that she has dealt with grief every time it gets hard is, let's talk about our puppy. Let's talk about our chicken nuggets. It's anything but talking about that. My healing place has helped a lot with that, because even if Emily is kind of a bystander, as other people are talking about it at times that are a little bit more ready to share than she is, I think she does process that, and it means something to her. And slowly but surely, she's become a little bit more capable and willing to talk.
Working with elementary school age children, some of the same things will be true in terms of the younger child not really getting the permanence of death. And so we will need to, again, repeat that story over and over and over as children ask it. And unfortunately, this is difficult for parents, because when you're hurting, when you're grieving, sometimes parents don't want to tell that story over and over again. So it's helpful that a child have someone else they can go to. The other aspect I think that's important for us to remember with elementary age kids is that it is a physical experience, and so they need to be able to act that out physically. We need to do things that with them that allow them to move around and be physical so that they can let some of that anxiety that is so prevalent with grieving elementary school age children, and they're able to release that. Even just having crayon and clay and finger paint and torn paper kinds of things that they can do so that they really have every opportunity to express it in a way that's comfortable and allows them to really get out what they're trying to express. Also, just being able to play it out, to be allowed to act out that story in their play and not have someone react in a way of being horrified or feeling terribly sad, so that if they can go into their own playrooms at home and act that out and just simply be observed or validated in that as they're playing, how helpful that would be for children that age. I think when we talk about teenagers, I smile because it's a really tough age to nail down and to say this is what it looks like with a teenager, because perhaps more than any other age, there is such a spectrum in terms of what we're going to see. One of the things that I am constantly hearing from parents is, how do I know what is grief and what is just developmentally happening for my child? And in the last 3 to 4 years, it's become simpler for me to answer that question because I simply say, we're not going to know. All of those growth things that are going on for adolescents also involve some loss. And so there's a grief process that's going on there underlying those developmental tasks anyway. So when you overlay that with an experience of loss, we have a big period of time in our life when it'd be very hard to tease one out from the other.
To help determine what is grief for a preteen or teen and what is developmental, adults need to look at behavior changes.
Ian began withdrawing into his room, which was really atypical for him. We did have a period where he turned to try and self-medicate. He was drinking. When we finally sat down to have a very serious talk with Ian, he said that it was difficult for him to feel anything.
I think it's taken me a long time to be comfortable with the fact that I should grieve. I don't know what it looks like yet because I haven't gone through that process of letting myself think through what happened.
I think one of the things I'm always aware of with preteens and teens when they grieve is that it's such a period in life where you have such a heightened need for privacy. And then we're worried about them and we want them to be able to express and share these feelings. It's very delicate. And sometimes just a good journal or, a peer group can be so much more satisfactory for them than to be thinking that they're talking to another adult.
It's nice to be able to come and talk to somebody who's not going to judge you and not going to say, well, you should feel this way and you should feel that way. I think a lot of my feelings, I've actually been able to say how I feel.
I think also that for teens, it's a time when they're very naturally separating from parents. But if then, ahead of that just very gradual way, a parent is ripped away, this is very devastating. So all of these things make it just a very precarious time where they probably cannot be loved enough. It's always a delicate balance with teens. What is the space they need to be given so their privacy is not invaded? And then what is the space that we need to create where they feel safe enough to at least express some of the feelings that they're feeling?
Some children may have a particularly hard time after the death of a loved one.
When children are having a particularly difficult time, I think it's always wise to have in the back of our minds, is this a case where we need to get some professional intervention? When in doubt, I always say pick up a phone and get that help and ask. But sometimes it's just the throes of where the size of the grief is taking them. One thing that I've seen people do with incredible success, there's nothing like having somebody be 100% present to you. It may not in all cases be able to be the parent who's able to do this at the time. It's also very interesting how short a time you may need of this, but it's 100% present.
Nature and other mediums can be used to help adults be present with their children and help children express what they are feeling.
Help a child get out into nature and find a way there into that which has so much power in it to express whatever they are feeling inside, I think sometimes is invaluable. Through artwork, kids can often paint like a totally black painting and let that be okay. And let it be okay that it's a black painting for a month, or that it's got a swear word on it, or whatever it is that needs to express appropriately the way they're feeling inside. They learn from the way we respond to it that it's okay to have these feelings.
It's amazing how little kids express things through pictures. And we would talk about pictures that would have mommy in various positions and clouds and all this stuff. And it was every little thing had a meaning. And so that was very helpful to kind of have these creative tools that I can use at home. We've instituted things like if she gets really angry, for instance, if Emily gets angry, which is one of the ways she expresses her grief toward this, she just gets angry and short with people at times. We go and do the hard coloring thing. She takes crayons and just abuses them against her construction paper until she calms down.
There are many ways in which teachers, coaches, and friends of the family can help children with their grief.
I went right back to school after my brother died. The week after he died, I went back to school. So a lot of my teachers tried to avoid me, I guess. It was just, I guess a lot of them didn't know how to handle dealing with it.
One of the things that I think is so important for coaches and teachers and so on to know is that we don't want to make assumptions about what children need. We need to ask kids. So often I've heard a teacher or a coach say, well, they're grieving, so they must want me to not mention the name of that person because that's going to make them really sad. Well, for one child, that might be really true. For another child, it's music to their ears to hear that name.
I felt when I grieved like I had antenna that said to me, this person will listen to my pain, and this person will be a turn away, or this person will be a don't feel that way. So a lot of it is just the radar that gets picked up when you know that somebody can do what you really need, which is to listen, listen, listen. It helped my daughter that teachers in the school were aware when events came up like creating crafts for Father's Day. It helped my daughter for me to have gone to those teachers and have said, there's a child in your class that doesn't have a father, so that they could be careful, so that as they approach that date, they could say to the class, we're going to be making gifts for the men that are really important in our lives, and it may be your grandfather, it could be your uncle, it could be a good friend of your family, your father. I mean, those things all helped. And it expressed a sensitivity that said to my daughter, they're not going to make the remark that's just going to make me want to melt into my chair.
My teacher let me get out my folder.
Can you tell us about the folder?
It has pictures of him and has paper to draw pictures in it. And it has his bookmark with his picture on it.
So you keep that folder in your desk at school? Is that what you do?
I keep it in my backpack, and sometimes I take it out, and sometimes just doodle something in there.
I think for teachers, I think advice I have is similar to parents, is watch for, is recognition that I think during the grieving period that their energy and that their focus may be limited. They may be half-hearted at what they're doing. On the social side, are they off sitting alone instead of interacting with their peers?
Right. Or has their peer group changed completely? If your child's in a high school of 3,000 kids and all of a sudden their peer group completely shifts, that's something I think the teacher should notify the parent of and say, did you realize? You know, it may be a completely natural thing to happen, but once again, it's a dramatic shift in behavior.
With the help of the adults in their lives, the journey through grief for a child can be a healing experience.
The first thing I would want us to all remember is that listening, and I cannot say that enough, is a primary tool that we have for just being present to children and allowing them to be where they are. Secondly, the truth. Speaking the truth with children at a developmentally appropriate level so that we don't have children creating and filling in the gaps with images that are usually far worse than the reality.
Healing doesn't happen without a place of safety. And for a child, for teens, what creates safety in a home is structure, is stability, is as much consistency as there possibly can be, which is everything from very practical things like nutritious food keeps getting put on the table, and usually there's so many people that will help you with that. It's consistent bedtimes, it's that the rules still stick. Just because you're grieving doesn't mean that you can have any kind of outlandish behavior and we're going to say, well, you know, they're grieving. That this container that the home can be, this stable, steady place.
They need a hug from somebody else that's been through there, and they need to hear that it's okay. You must communicate with your children. You absolutely must communicate with them. And I think that creative approaches to do that, if one thing's not working, let it go, don't get frustrated. Come back later, try something else, but don't let it go. And don't be afraid to keep talking about the loss.
There isn't a perfect way to help your family grieve. There isn't a way that your child can go through this without cuts and scrapes and bruises. It's a wounding experience, and it then is part now of their life journey. And so just to relax a bit and to know that we all do essentially the very best we can, and it's that we're trying. It's that we're reaching out to really respect one another and to love through a very difficult time. That, in the end, I really believe is the final say.
What do kids need when they've had somebody in their family who's died?
When I'm grieving, I really need my bear or like my mom or dad, or at least a family member there.
My mom just comes in there. Sometimes she just sits right beside me and she said, "It's okay, don't be worried, he's happy right now."
So Emily, do you like people to talk about it, or you don't want people to talk about it? Which?
I do.
How does it help you for people to talk about it?
It helps me feel about them more.